picture a night shift in the middle of nowhere. No cities for 60 miles, no highway noise, just the low hum of cooling fans and the soft glow of spectrum analyzers cycling through frequencies most people don't even know exist. This is the world of deep band radio monitoring, a job that sounds more exciting than it actually is. Most nights, it's just static, solar interference, the occasional military satellite bleeding into civilian bands. Routine, predictable, safe. But on one particular night in late autumn, something changed. A signal appeared where no signal should have been. Not a voice, not music, not the familiar chatter of encrypted military communications. This was different, mathematically precise, repeating in patterns that suggested intention rather than accident. And strangest of all, it wasn't coming from Earth, but it also wasn't coming from space. It was coming from somewhere in between, broadcasting on a frequency that technically shouldn't even be possible to transmit. This is the story of what happened when someone decided to answer back. Chapter 1. The Listening Post. The facility sits on a desert plateau in northwestern New Mexico, far from any major population center. Officially, it's listed as an atmospheric monitoring station operated under contract by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Its purpose, according to public records, is to track solar storm activity and monitor radio frequency interference that might affect civilian communications. The kind of work that keeps satellites functioning and prevents your GPS from glitching during solar flares. The truth is slightly more complicated. While the station does perform those functions, it also serves as part of a larger network. Hundreds of listening posts scattered across remote locations worldwide, all quietly logging unusual electromagnetic activity. Most of what they record is mundane: solar radiation bursts, lightning discharge patterns, the electromagnetic signature of distant thunderstorms rolling across the ionosphere. Occasionally, they'll pick up an unidentified signal, usually military testing, sometimes amateur radio operators pushing their equipment beyond legal limits. Once in a while, something genuinely mysterious that gets flagged, reviewed, and filed away without explanation. The station operates with minimal staff. During daylight hours, 3 technicians rotate shifts, maintaining equipment and processing data. At night, it's just one person, a civilian contractor named Marcus Webb. Marcus had been working the night shift for 14 months. He was 32 years old, held a degree in electrical engineering, and had previously worked for a defense contractor before taking this job for the solitude it offered. He wasn't running from anything dramatic, no scandal, no personal tragedy. He simply preferred the quiet rhythm of monitoring equipment in isolation over the office politics and deadline pressures of corporate engineering. His shift started at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. Most nights followed the same pattern. He'd arrive, review the automated logs from the day shift, calibrate the spectrum analyzers, then settle into the routine of monitoring 7 different frequency bands simultaneously. The equipment did most of the work. His job was to notice when something unusual appeared and document it properly. The station itself was surprisingly small, a single-story prefabricated building with reinforced walls to shield against electromagnetic interference. Inside, the main monitoring room was lined with equipment racks holding receivers, analyzers, recording devices, and computer terminals. Everything was old but reliable. Government contracts rarely paid for upgrades unless something actually broke. Marcus spent most nights reading, occasionally stepping outside to check the antenna array that surrounded the building in concentric circles. each ring tuned to different frequency ranges. The desert night was silent, except for the wind and the distant yip of coyotes. No light pollution, no aircraft noise, just darkness and stars, and the endless sweep of electromagnetic spectrum flowing invisibly through the air around him. He had logged exactly 0 unexplainable signals during his entire tenure, until the night of November 14th. Chapter 2. The impossible frequency. It appeared at 11:43 p.m, manifesting on the spectrum analyzer like a ghost materializing from static. Marcus noticed it immediately, not because of any alarm or automated flag, but because of the visual signature. The waterfall display showed frequency activity over time, with colours representing signal strength. Normally, the deep bands he monitored showed mostly blue and green, background noise and weak distant transmissions. But this signal glowed bright yellow, sitting perfectly still in a frequency range that should have been empty. He leaned closer to the monitor, adjusting the bandwidth to get a clearer view. The signal occupied a narrow band between two classified military frequencies, a gap that existed specifically because both the frequency above and below it were restricted for defense communications. Nothing civilian should be transmitting there. Nothing military should be transmitting there either, because the gap served as a buffer zone to prevent interference. Yet there it was. Marcus checked the automatic recording system, confirmed it was capturing everything. Then he began analysing the signal's characteristics. It wasn't continuous. Instead, it pulsed in a repeating pattern, lasting exactly 11 minutes and 17 seconds before starting over. Each pulse consisted of multiple harmonic tones layered together, not random, but structured like musical chords, except the frequencies involved didn't correspond to any musical scale he recognized. He ran the signal through analysis software designed to identify transmission protocols. The program churned for several minutes before returning results that made him frown. The signal contained no modulation patterns consistent with voice, data, or telemetry. It wasn't encrypted communication. It wasn't a beacon. It wasn't a carrier wave waiting for information to be added. It was just tone, pure, mathematically precise tone, repeating endlessly. Marcus pulled up reference databases containing known satellite frequencies, radio astronomy surveys, natural electromagnetic phenomena. Nothing matched. He checked the antenna direction logs. The receiving array automatically recorded which direction signals arrived from, useful for triangulating sources. The data made no sense. The signal appeared to be coming from directly overhead, but also from multiple horizontal directions simultaneously, as if it was arriving from everywhere at once. That shouldn't be possible. A signal had to originate somewhere. Even a broadcast designed to scatter in all directions would show directional bias based on the transmitter's location. This signal had no bias. It simply existed in the frequency spectrum, omnipresent. Marcus spent the next hour running every diagnostic he could think of. He checked for equipment malfunction, none detected. He verified the calibration of the receivers. Perfect. He even went outside and visually inspected the antenna array with a flashlight, looking for any physical damage or interference that might create a false signal. Everything was functioning normally. The signal continued, unwavering, repeating its 11-minute cycle with absolute precision. At 1 a.m, he opened the digital spectrum analysis tool and visualized the signal's waveform in detail. What he saw made him stop breathing for a moment. When displayed graphically, the harmonic layers formed patterns, not random interference, but geometric shapes, triangles nested within circles, parallel lines that intersected at precise angles, symmetrical structures that repeated across the frequency range like architectural blueprints. This wasn't noise. This wasn't nature. This was designed. Marcus sat back in his chair, staring at the monitor. Protocol dictated that unexplained signals be reported to the station supervisor, who would then forward the information up the chain to whatever agency needed to know. But it was the middle of the night, and the supervisor wouldn't be available until 8 a.m. He decided to document everything thoroughly before filing the report. Better to have complete data than incomplete speculation. For the next 2 hours, he recorded the signal from multiple receivers, captured spectrum images at different resolutions, and compiled detailed technical notes describing every observable characteristic. The signal never wavered, never weakened, never stopped. At 3:27 a.m, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He decided to respond. Chapter 3: The Signal Responds. The test was simple. He configured one of the station's transmitters to send a basic acknowledgement ping, a single 2-second pulse on the same frequency as the mysterious signal. Nothing complex, just enough to see if anything would react. He hesitated before pressing the transmit key. Official protocol prohibited unauthorized transmissions, especially on or near military frequencies. But technically, the frequency he was using wasn't military. It was the gap between military bands, a bureaucratic grey area. He pressed the key. The transmitter sent its brief pulse, barely noticeable compared to the ongoing signal. Marcus watched the spectrum analyzer, expecting nothing to happen. 14 seconds later, the signal changed. The pattern shifted. The 11-minute cycle interrupted mid-sequence. For 3 seconds, the signal went completely silent. Then it resumed, but different. The harmonic layers had reorganized. New frequencies appeared. The geometric patterns in the waveform transformed into different shapes. And then Marcus noticed something that made his hands go cold. The signal was repeating his ping back at him. Not exactly, not a simple echo, but the tonal structure of his 2-second transmission was embedded in the larger pattern, woven into the harmonic layers like a sample incorporated into a larger musical composition. The signal had taken what he sent and integrated it, learned from it, responded to it. He stared at the monitors, his mind racing through possibilities. Equipment malfunction? No, the receivers were passive, incapable of generating signals on their own. Automated response from some classified military system? Possible, but why would it alter its entire transmission pattern just from a simple ping? The signal continued its new pattern for exactly 11 minutes and 17 seconds, then reset again. But this time, it retained the modifications. His ping was now permanently part of the sequence. This was no longer passive observation. This was communication. Marcus should have stopped there, should have documented everything and waited for his supervisor, should have followed protocol and let someone else make the decisions. Instead, he transmitted again. This time, he sent a more complex signal, a mathematical sequence, the prime numbers from 2 to 23, encoded as frequency pulses, a pattern that could only be created by intelligent intent. The response came faster this time. 7 seconds of silence. Then the signal reorganized completely. The prime number sequence appeared in the waveform, but extended. The signal had continued the pattern, broadcasting the next 15 prime numbers Marcus hadn't sent. It wasn't just responding, it was participating. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Not fear exactly, but a profound, unsettling awareness that he was engaging with something far beyond his understanding. Whatever was generating this signal possessed the capacity to receive, analyze, and intelligently respond to mathematical communication within seconds. He checked the directional logs again. Still omnidirectional, still impossible to locate. The signal was coming from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously, defying every principle of radio transmission he'd ever learned. For the next hour, he sat motionless, watching the modified signal repeat its cycle, his prime numbers now woven permanently into the pattern alongside his original ping. Somewhere out there, something was listening, and now it knew someone was listening back. Chapter 4. Sky disturbances begin. The changes started subtle. The next night, Marcus arrived for his shift to find a message from the day technician. Equipment had been acting strange. Compass needles in the calibration kit spinning slowly clockwise, never settling on magnetic north. Minor radio interference reported by a trucker passing through the area around noon. Nothing severe, just odd. Marcus checked the signal, still broadcasting, still repeating its modified pattern with his prime numbers embedded in the sequence. He decided not to transmit again. Not yet. Better to observe and document. But at midnight, during one of the signal's 11-minute peaks, something happened. Every piece of electronic equipment in the station flickered. Lights dimmed for half a second. Monitors displayed brief static. The spectrum analyzers registered a massive electromagnetic surge across all frequencies simultaneously, like a pulse of raw energy washing through the local environment. Then everything returned to normal. Marcus checked the backup generator and power conditioning equipment. No problems detected. The surge hadn't come from the electrical system. It had come from outside, from the air itself, coinciding perfectly with the signal's peak intensity. He pulled up the NOAA weather satellite data. No solar activity, no atmospheric disturbances, no explanation. Over the following nights, the pattern repeated. Every time the signal reached maximum intensity, a brief electromagnetic pulse rippled through the area, and each night the effects became more pronounced. Local radio stations began experiencing interference during evening broadcasts. RM bands filled with strange harmonic tones that listeners complained about. The county sheriff's department reported communication problems with their dispatch radios, signals cutting out, replaced by musical notes that resembled the patterns Marcus was monitoring. Then the wildlife began reacting. Ranchers 30 miles from the station reported livestock becoming agitated at night, cattle refusing to settle, horses pacing their enclosures, dogs barking at empty sky. A local birdwatcher documented something even stranger. Flocks of night-migrating birds suddenly changing direction, mid-flight, wheeling away from the area above the station as if encountering an invisible barrier. Some didn't change direction, they simply vanished. One moment visible in binoculars, the next moment gone, as if they'd flown through a doorway into somewhere else. Marcus compiled reports from emergency services, weather stations, and local news. A pattern emerged, everything centered on his location. The station sat at the middle of concentric circles of disturbance, radiating outward with each nightly signal peak. He knew he should report everything, knew this had gone beyond simple radio monitoring into something potentially dangerous. But he also knew that reporting it would mean losing access. The facility would be locked down. Higher authorities would take over. And he'd never learn the truth about what he'd initiated with those transmissions. So he kept documenting, kept observing, kept waiting. On November 20th, 6 days after the original signal appeared, the first visual sighting occurred. A deputy sheriff driving Highway 60 east of the station stopped to investigate what he initially thought was a disabled vehicle with its hazard lights on. According to his incident report, he observed 3 amber lights hovering approximately 50 feet above the desert floor, arranged in a perfect triangle pattern. The lights made no sound, produced no heat signature visible on his thermal camera, and when he approached to within 200 feet, they simply faded from view, not moving away, not rising into the sky, but disappearing as if someone had turned off a switch. The deputy requested backup. By the time another unit arrived 15 minutes later, there was nothing to see, but the deputy's dashboard camera had captured 18 seconds of footage showing exactly what he described. 3 amber lights, geometric formation, absolutely silent, defying explanation. 2 nights later, a family driving home to Magdalena reported seeing a triangular formation of lights keeping pace with their vehicle for nearly 10 miles before vanishing. Then a ranch hand spotted similar lights hovering near a windmill. Then a utility worker saw them near power lines. All sightings occurred at night, all within a 40-mile radius of the station, and all coincided with the signal's peak transmission periods. Marcus cross-referenced every report with his own data logs. The correlation was undeniable. The signal wasn't just broadcasting anymore, it was manifesting. Chapter 5. First Visual Contact. Marcus saw it on November 22nd. He'd stayed an hour past the end of his shift, unwilling to leave the equipment during a particularly intense signal period. Finally, at 7:15 a.m, with dawn light beginning to grey the eastern sky, he locked up the station and headed to his truck. The drive back to his apartment in Socorro normally took 45 minutes, along empty 2-lane roads cutting through open desert. He'd made the drive hundreds of times, often watching spectacular sunrises paint the landscape in shades of orange and red. This morning, 12 miles from the station, he noticed something wrong with the sky. At first, he thought it was an optical illusion, desert heat shimmer maybe, though the morning air was cold, but the distortion didn't move like heat shimmer. It held a fixed position above the northern horizon, roughly 2 miles distant. Marcus slowed the truck, then pulled onto the shoulder. The distortion was triangular. Not a craft, not an object, more like a section of sky that had been displaced, folded somehow, showing a view that didn't match the surrounding landscape. He could see stars through it, despite the dawn sky making stars invisible everywhere else. And those stars were wrong. The constellations didn't match. They were shifted, rotated, as if viewed from a different location or a different time. Marcus grabbed his phone and started recording video. His hands shook slightly as he zoomed in on the anomaly. Through his phone screen, the distortion became more defined. The triangular section of displaced sky measured roughly 300 feet per side, hanging motionless about 1,000 feet above the ground. The edges weren't sharp, they wavered slightly, like heat shimmer, but the overall shape remained stable. And inside that triangle, beyond the misaligned stars, something massive and dark occluded parts of the sky. Not a cloud, not a shadow, something solid but somehow camouflaged, visible only because it blocked the wrong place stars behind it. Marcus watched for 5 minutes. The triangle didn't move, didn't change, just hung there, defying every law of optics and physics he understood. Then, as the sun finally broke the horizon, the distortion faded, not suddenly, gradually, like fog burning off in morning light. Within 30 seconds, it was gone completely. The sky returned to normal, Stars disappeared in the growing daylight, as they should. Marcus stopped recording. His phone showed 7 minutes of footage. He played it back immediately, half expecting to see nothing, to discover his eyes had deceived him. But there it was, clear digital evidence, the triangular distortion, the wrong stars, the dark mass obscuring them. He sat in his truck on the empty roadside, watching the video loop, his mind struggling to process what he'd witnessed. This wasn't lights in the sky. This wasn't misidentified aircraft. This was something bending reality itself, creating a window into somewhere else, and hiding something enormous behind it. The signal wasn't just communication, it was camouflage technology, and whatever was being hidden had been there, hovering above the New Mexico desert, possibly for days or weeks or longer, invisible until the signal revealed it. Marcus drove the rest of the way home in silence, his phone clutched in his hand, the video evidence burning like a coal in his pocket. He didn't know what to do with the information, didn't know who he could trust with it, didn't know if showing anyone would protect him or endanger him, so he did the only thing that made sense. He went back that night and kept monitoring, kept documenting, kept trying to understand what he'd stumbled into. Chapter 6: The Frequency Map. Marcus spent the following day reviewing every piece of data he'd collected since November 14th. The signal characteristics, the timing of disturbances, the locations of sighting reports, his own video footage of the triangular distortion. He created a digital map, plotting every incident on satellite imagery of the region. What emerged made him lean back in his chair, staring at the screen. The sightings weren't random. Each report, when plotted with GPS coordinates from incident records and his own observations, formed a precise geometric pattern. The lights, the distortions, the electromagnetic disturbances all occurred at specific points that, when connected, created a grid. And at the centre of that grid sat his monitoring station. Marcus overlaid the signal strength data from his receivers. The correlation was perfect. The strongest signal readings corresponded exactly to the sighting locations. The pattern suggested the signal wasn't a simple broadcast emanating from a single point. Instead, it appeared to be a network, multiple synchronized transmission points, creating interference patterns that peaked at specific coordinates, like a positioning system, like GPS, but functioning in reverse, not helping someone find their location, but marking specific locations in space with energy signatures strong enough to manifest visible effects. He measured the grid spacing. Each intersection point sat exactly 17.3 miles from its neighbours, forming perfect equilateral triangles across the landscape. The pattern extended far beyond the immediate area. Based on the mathematical progression, Marcus estimated it could cover thousands of square miles, possibly the entire southwestern United States. But why? What purpose could such a system serve? He examined his video footage again, frame by frame. The triangular distortion measured approximately 300 feet per side. He checked the grid spacing, 17.3 miles. The ratio wasn't coincidental. The visible distortion was exactly 1/300th the size of the grid spacing, perfectly proportional, deliberately designed. A thought occurred to him, unsettling in its implications. What if the grid wasn't marking locations on Earth? What if it was marking locations above Earth? He calculated altitude based on the size and apparent distance of the distortion he'd witnessed, roughly 1,000 feet above ground level. He checked the other sighting reports. Every description mentioned lights or anomalies at low altitude, none higher than 1,500 feet. The grid wasn't mapping ground positions. It was creating a three-dimensional lattice in the lower atmosphere, marking specific coordinates in space where something could position itself, like parking spaces, like designated coordinates for objects that needed to maintain station over specific locations without being detected. Marcus pulled up satellite weather imagery from NOAA and cross-referenced it with his signal logs. On nights when the signal reached maximum intensity, subtle atmospheric disturbances appeared in infrared imaging, temperature variations that shouldn't exist, small pockets of warmer air hanging motionless against prevailing winds. Those pockets corresponded to grid intersection points. Something was occupying those coordinates, something massive enough to affect air temperature through its mere presence, something using the signal network as a positioning reference to maintain precise locations. And it had been there for weeks, possibly months, possibly longer, hidden in plain sight, invisible, except during moments when the signal intensity peaked and the camouflage system momentarily failed. Marcus realized he wasn't looking at an isolated event. He was looking at infrastructure, an established system operating continuously, revealed only because he'd transmitted on the frequency it used for coordination. His ping hadn't created this. He'd simply made it visible. Chapter 7: Government Interference. They arrived on November 25th. Marcus was running diagnostics on the antenna array when a black SUV pulled into the station's gravel lot, followed by a second identical vehicle. No government markings, no agency identification, just dark-tinted windows and the rigid posture of people who expected immediate compliance. 4 individuals emerged, 2 men and 2 women, all dressed in similar business casual attire, khakis, polo shirts, lightweight jackets, despite the cold desert morning. They could have been representatives from any federal contractor or military liaison office. The older of the 2 men approached Marcus with a professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Webb, we need to discuss your monitoring activities." No introduction, no credentials displayed, just an immediate assumption of authority. Marcus straightened from the antenna he'd been inspecting. "Who are you?" "That's not relevant to this conversation." The man gestured toward the station building. "Can we speak inside?" "Do you have authorization to be here? This is a restricted government facility." The smile remained unchanged. "We're aware. We also know you've been conducting unauthorized transmissions on protected frequencies. That's a federal violation. We're here to help you avoid serious legal consequences." Marcus felt his chest tighten. They knew about the transmissions, which meant they'd been monitoring the station, possibly for days. He led them inside, his mind racing through possible responses. Deny everything? Claim equipment malfunction? Or cooperate and hope they'd provide information? Once in the monitoring room, the 4 visitors spread out efficiently. One woman began photographing equipment. One man started examining the spectrum analyzers. The older man, who'd spoken outside, positioned himself between Marcus and the exit. The second woman, younger, with precise movements suggesting military training, pulled a tablet from her bag. "Mr. Webb, you transmitted on frequency 743.8 MHz on November 15th at 3:27 a.m. You transmitted again at 3:39 a.m. Both transmissions violated Federal Communications Commission regulations and potentially interfered with classified operations." "I was responding to an unidentified signal. That's part of my job description." Passive monitoring is your job. Active transmission requires approval from your supervisor and clearance through proper channels. Marcus gestured to the spectrum analyzer, showing the ongoing signal pattern. Then maybe you can tell me what that is. It's been broadcasting continuously for 11 days. It's affecting electronics across a 40-mile radius. People are seeing aerial phenomena, and it started responding when I transmitted toward it. The four visitors exchanged glances. The older man stepped closer to the monitors, studying the waveform display. What you're monitoring is classified satellite testing. The disturbances you've noted are unfortunate side effects of new communication protocols being evaluated for defense purposes. Your transmissions interfered with those tests and potentially compromised national security. That's not a satellite signal. You're not qualified to make that assessment. I have 14 months of baseline data from this station. I know what satellite signals look like. This doesn't match any known transmission profile. The woman with the tablet spoke again, her voice harder. Mr. Webb, we're not here to debate signal characteristics. We're here to secure your data and ensure no further interference occurs. The other man, who'd been silent until now, began disconnecting recording equipment. We'll need all logs from November 14th forward. Hard drives, backup storage, personal notes, everything. Marcus felt anger rising. You can't just confiscate station property. We have authorization from the Department of Defense. Would you like to see the paperwork, or would you prefer to cooperate voluntarily? They worked efficiently, professionally. Within 20 minutes, they'd removed every storage device containing data from the past 2 weeks. The spectrum analyzers continued displaying the signal in real time, but all historical records were gone. Marcus watched helplessly as they loaded equipment into their vehicles. Before leaving, the older man paused at the door. His professional demeanor cracked slightly, revealing something underneath. Not hostility, fear. Mr. Webb, I'm going to give you advice that's not part of my official instructions. If this signal answers you again, if it responds to any transmission, any attempt at communication, stop immediately. Don't engage, don't investigate, just walk away. Why, what is it? The man glanced at his colleagues loading the SUVs, then back at Marcus. We don't know. That's what makes it dangerous. Signals that adapt, that learn, that respond intelligently to contact, those aren't supposed to exist. And when they do exist, he paused, choosing words carefully. Let's just say your safety depends on not becoming interesting to whatever's generating it. Are you saying this isn't government testing? I'm saying my advice stands. Stop transmitting, stop investigating, let professionals handle this. Who? What professionals? But the man was already walking to his vehicle, the conversation over. Marcus stood in the doorway, watching the SUVs drive away in a cloud of dust, taking with them every piece of evidence he'd collected, except for one thing. His phone sitting in his apartment 12 miles away, containing 7 minutes of video showing the triangular distortion in the dawn sky. They hadn't known about that. Chapter 8. The Unauthorized Reply. Marcus should have listened, should have backed off and let whatever was happening continue without his involvement. He made it 3 days. 3 days of monitoring the signal passively, watching it continue its endless cycle, knowing that somewhere above the desert, invisible objects were using it as a positioning reference. 3 days of reading incident reports about electromagnetic disturbances growing stronger. 3 days of lying awake, thinking about the fear in that government agent's eyes. On November 28th, he transmitted again. Not impulsively, not carelessly. He spent hours preparing the message, using every reference on mathematical communication he could find. Prime numbers had worked before, but they were too simple, predictable. If something truly intelligent was monitoring the signal, it would need more complex stimulation, to respond meaningfully. Marcus chose the Fibonacci sequence, a mathematical pattern found throughout nature: spirals in seashells, branching in trees, the arrangement of seeds in sunflowers. If the intelligence behind the signal understood Earth biology, it would recognize the pattern's significance. He encoded the first 20 Fibonacci numbers as frequency pulses and transmitted at 2:37 a.m. during a signal peak period. Then waited, silence for 9 seconds. Then the signal transformed. Not just reorganized, completely transformed. The harmonic layers multiplied, expanding into frequencies the monitoring equipment struggled to display. The geometric patterns in the waveform exploded into fractal complexity, repeating self-similar structures at every scale of magnification. And something else appeared in the signal. Something Marcus's audio analysis software identified as artifacts, irregularities that shouldn't exist in pure tonal transmission. He routed the signal through speakers. What emerged from the static made his skin crawl. Whispers, not voices, not language, but tonal variations that mimicked the rhythm and cadence of human speech. Like someone had taken recordings of people talking and stripped away everything except the musical quality of their voices, leaving ghostly impressions of communication without actual words. Marcus analysed the audio spectrographically. The whisper-like patterns showed structure consistent with phonemes, the basic sound units that make up language. But they weren't any language he recognised. They weren't even consistent with human vocal range. Some frequencies extended far below what human vocal cords could produce. Others oscillated too rapidly for biological speech. It was mimicry. The signal was attempting to replicate human communication patterns. Like a parrot learning to imitate sounds it heard without understanding their meaning. Except the signal had never been exposed to human voices. Marcus had only transmitted mathematical sequences. Unless... He pulled up analysis of the electromagnetic disturbances. Radio interference, disrupted communications. The signal had been washing through the area for 2 weeks, passing through every radio transmission, every phone call, every broadcast. It had been listening to everything, learning, and now it was trying to communicate using patterns derived from human speech. The whisper artifacts continued for 17 minutes, growing more complex, more structured. Marcus recorded everything, his hands trembling as he made notes. Then the whispers resolved into something approaching actual phonetic structure. Still not words, but closer. Organised into what sounded almost like sentences, rhythm, pauses, inflection. The spectrum analyzer showed the signal intensity building to levels far beyond anything previously recorded. The equipment began displaying warnings about receiver saturation. Marcus reached for the transmit key, intending to respond again, to encourage further development of the communication attempt. His hand never reached the controls. Every light in the station went dark simultaneously. Chapter 9. The sky opens. The emergency backup lighting kicked in after 3 seconds, bathing the room in dim red glow. But the monitoring equipment remained dark, not shut down, completely dead, as if every circuit had been simultaneously severed from power. Marcus checked the backup generator status panel. Green lights indicated it was running normally, feeding power to the station's electrical system. But nothing was receiving that power. The electricity was flowing to nowhere. He grabbed a flashlight from the emergency kit and went outside. The desert night was absolutely silent. No wind, no insects, no distant highway traffic. Even the usual background hum of electrical equipment had ceased. leaving a vacuum of sound that felt physically oppressive. Marcus looked up. The stars were wrong, not missing, not obscured, wrong. The constellations had shifted, rotated slightly from their proper positions. It took him a moment to recognize what was happening. The distortion he'd seen 6 days earlier had expanded. That triangular window into displaced space now covered the entire visible sky above the station. He was looking up through a lens into somewhere else, and through that lens, something was becoming visible. The dark mass he'd glimpsed before was resolving into shape, not metal, not any material he could identify. It looked organic, geometric but flowing, like crystalline growth patterns seen in time-lapse biology videos. The surface seemed to pulse very faintly with bioluminescence, creating subtle patterns of light that rippled across an area he estimated at several 100 feet in diameter. It hung directly overhead, approximately 1,000 feet above the station, completely silent and utterly impossible. Marcus stared, his mind trying and failing to categorize what he was seeing. It wasn't a spacecraft in any conventional sense. It didn't have engines, seams, windows, or any features suggesting mechanical construction. Instead, it resembled something grown rather than built. A massive structure of interlocking geometric forms that somehow bent light around itself, remaining invisible except when viewed through the distortion field it generated. The pulsing light patterns intensified, cycling through rhythms that matched the frequencies he'd been monitoring. The signal wasn't a transmission. It was this object's method of maintaining camouflage. The radio frequencies were creating an electromagnetic bubble that bent electromagnetic radiation, including visible light around itself. He'd seen this principle theoretically discussed in classified research papers on metamaterial cloaking. But this wasn't metamaterial. This was something exponentially more sophisticated, operating at scales and energy levels far beyond human engineering. The light patterns shifted, responding to something. Marcus realized he was still holding his flashlight, its beam pointing skyward. He turned it off. The pulsing slowed, dimmed slightly, reacting to the absence of his light. It was observing him, aware of his presence, responding to his actions. Marcus stepped back toward the station building, moving slowly, trying to appear non-threatening to something that probably didn't understand human body language. The object above pulsed once brightly. Then the geometric light patterns began moving across its surface in waves, converging on a point directly facing Marcus's position. From that convergence point, something detached. A smaller object, roughly the size of a car, descended smoothly, silently, leaving no exhaust or propulsion signature. It moved like a leaf falling through still water, drifting down with absolute control. Marcus backed against the station wall, his heart hammering. The smaller object descended to approximately 50 feet above ground, then stopped, hovering effortlessly. From its underside, a beam of pale blue light emerged, sweeping across the station building, the antenna array, finally settling on Marcus himself. The light didn't hurt. It felt warm, almost curious, like being examined under a microscope. Marcus couldn't move, not from paralysis exactly. His muscles still functioned, but movement felt wrong, inappropriate, dangerous. Some instinct, deeper than conscious thought, told him to remain absolutely still. The blue light intensified. Marcus felt a sensation he'd never experienced before. Awareness of being scanned at a level far beyond visual observation. It was like someone was reading through him, examining not just his physical form, but the electrical patterns of his nervous system, the chemistry of his thoughts. Time became strange. He couldn't tell if seconds or minutes were passing. The world narrowed to just him and that light and the massive presence above, watching, analysing, learning. Then the light withdrew. The smaller object rose smoothly back toward the larger structure and reintegrated seamlessly into its surface. The pulsing patterns shifted again, changed rhythm, and Marcus understood with absolute certainty that the scan was complete. Whatever controlled that object now knew everything about him that could be known through observation. His biology, his chemistry, his neural patterns, possibly even his thoughts. The massive structure began to fade, not moving away, fading as the distortion field reasserted itself, bending light back around the object until it vanished completely from visibility. The stars overhead returned to their proper positions. The triangular window closed. Marcus was left standing in normal desert night, alone, with no evidence that anything had occurred except his own racing heart and the complete shutdown of every electronic system in the station. And one other thing, his hands were moving without conscious direction, pulling a notebook from his pocket, uncapping a pen, sketching furiously. He watched his own hands draw geometric patterns, the light configurations he'd seen on the object's surface, mathematical notations, coordinate systems, star maps showing constellations he didn't recognize. The drawings filled page after page. His hand moved with absolute certainty, creating diagrams of impossible complexity, annotated with numerical sequences he'd never learned. After 10 minutes, the compulsion faded. Marcus stared at what he'd drawn, understanding none of it, but knowing somehow that understanding would come later. Chapter 10. The Abduction Without Movement. Marcus had no memory of entering his truck, no memory of driving, but he found himself 12 miles from the station at dawn, parked on a dirt road he didn't recognise, with 6 hours missing from his night. His last clear memory was standing in the station parking lot, staring at the drawings in his notebook. The next memory was opening his eyes to find himself behind the steering wheel, engine running, with the sunrise painting the eastern sky. He checked his phone. 7:43 a.m. His shift had ended at 6, but according to his truck's GPS log, he'd been parked in this location since 2:14 a.m, before the massive object appeared, before the smaller probe descended. Time had fractured somehow. The sequence of events didn't align with actual hours elapsed. Marcus examined himself. No injuries, no marks. Clothes undisturbed. Everything normal except for the gap in his memory and the certainty that something profound had occurred during those missing hours. He looked at his notebook, still open on the passenger seat. The drawings he remembered making were there. Geometric patterns, star charts, mathematical notations. But there were more pages filled now. At least 15 pages of diagrams he had no memory of creating, drawn in his handwriting, but depicting concepts he couldn't comprehend. Structural blueprints showing architectural forms that couldn't exist in three-dimensional space. Equations using mathematical symbols he'd never seen. Detailed sketches of biological structures, organs perhaps, but not human organs. Too complex, too many chambers and connections. And on the final page, a simple message written in his own hand. Observation Protocol 17 complete. Subject viable for linguistic interface development. Proceed to phase integration. Marcus read it 3 times, trying to remember writing those words. Nothing. The sentence meant nothing to him, but the handwriting was definitely his. the same hasty scrawl he used for technical notes. He drove back to the station slowly, his mind cycling through impossible scenarios. Drugged? No signs of chemical influence, hallucination. The physical evidence in his notebook proved something had occurred. Psychological break? He felt lucid, rational, just profoundly confused. The station looked normal in morning light. The backup generator was still running. He could hear it from the parking lot. But when he entered the monitoring room, the equipment remained dead. No power to any systems, despite the generator functioning perfectly. Marcus spent an hour checking circuits. Every connection was intact, every breaker closed. The electrical system should have been operational, but somehow nothing would turn on. The current was flowing. He verified it with a multimeter, but the equipment refused to function, as if the electrons themselves had forgotten their purpose. He gave up trying to fix it, and instead focused on the larger mystery. What had happened during those 6 missing hours? He knew standard abduction narratives from pop culture, people claiming alien encounters involving medical examination, implanted devices, telepathic communication. He'd always dismissed such accounts as psychological fantasy or misinterpreted prosaic experiences. But those people didn't have notebooks filled with information they couldn't remember learning, didn't have 6-hour gaps aligned with electromagnetic anomalies and visual observation of impossible objects. Marcus photographed every page of his notebook, uploaded the images to secure cloud storage, then reviewed them carefully on his laptop. The star charts showed constellations he couldn't identify. He compared them to astronomical databases. None matched. Either they were random drawings created by his unconscious mind, or they depicted the night sky from a location not on Earth. The mathematical notations used standard numerical symbols, but arranged in unfamiliar ways. He recognized some elements, Pythagorean relationships, geometric proofs, but the overall structure remained incomprehensible. The biological diagrams were most disturbing. They showed clear symmetry and organization suggesting intelligent design, but the anatomical structures followed no pattern consistent with Earth biology. Too many duplicate systems, redundant organs, circulation pathways that branched and rejoined in ways that would create fatal turbulence in any hydraulic system he understood. Unless the fluid being circulated wasn't blood, unless the physics governing those organic systems were different from Earth physics. Marcus set down his laptop, feeling vertigo despite sitting motionless. This information came from somewhere, from something. And somehow, during those missing hours, it had been transferred into his mind with enough fidelity that his hands could recreate it in detailed drawings. Not telepathy, not magic. Some form of data transfer using his own neural pathways as the storage medium. His brain had been used as a recording device, and the data had been written in a format he couldn't consciously access, but which his unconscious mind could retrieve and express through motor control of his hands. He looked at the message on the final page again. Subject viable for linguistic interface development. The signal hadn't been trying to communicate with him using those whisper artifacts. It had been testing him, evaluating whether his biology was suitable for direct information exchange, and apparently, he'd passed the test. Chapter 11. The Memory Implant. Marcus stopped going to his apartment, too exposed, too disconnected from what was happening. Instead, he set up a temporary living space in the station, sleeping bag in the break room, supplies from the local convenience store, laptop running on battery power, since the main electrical system remained mysteriously dead. The backup generator kept lights functioning, But Marcus found he preferred working in darkness now, with only the glow of his laptop screen for illumination. The darkness felt safer, less visible to whatever was watching from above, because something was definitely watching. Every night, during the peak signal periods, he felt it, a sense of being observed, examined, recorded. Not threatening exactly, but intensely present. Like standing in front of a camera, knowing every movement was being captured and analysed. He began having dreams that weren't quite dreams, semi-conscious episodes where information flowed through his mind in structured patterns. Not images or words, but pure concepts that bypassed language entirely. He'd wake with understanding of things he shouldn't know, the function of the grid system, not positioning in the way GPS worked, but quantum entanglement markers, allowing instantaneous coordination across vast distances. The grid points weren't transmitting locations, they were creating synchronized space-time coordinates that allowed the invisible objects to maintain perfect formation despite the absence of conventional communication. The purpose of the observations, not scientific curiosity, not military reconnaissance, something else, monitoring, tracking changes, documenting the progression of something happening on Earth that Marcus still couldn't quite grasp, the timeline. The grid had been operating for years, possibly decades. The signals he'd detected weren't new. They'd simply been invisible to his equipment until he transmitted and drew attention to himself. His ping had made him noticeable. His subsequent transmissions had made him interesting. And the Fibonacci sequence had made him viable for direct contact. He was being prepared for something. Marcus opened his notebook to a blank page and let his hand move freely, not consciously directing it. The pen sketched coordinate systems, numerical sequences, directional vectors. When he regained conscious control, he was looking at a map. Not geographic, spatial. 3-dimensional coordinates in the local area, extending from ground level to approximately 20,000 feet altitude. Each coordinate was marked with a timestamp. Future timestamps. Events that hadn't occurred yet. The pattern was clear. The grid was contracting. The spacing between coordinates was decreasing. Objects that had maintained positions 17 miles apart were moving closer together, forming a denser network, all converging on a central point. The monitoring station? Marcus checked the timestamps. The convergence would complete in 16 days. On December 14th, exactly 1 month after the original signal appeared. He didn't know what would happen when the convergence finished. His implanted knowledge didn't include that information, either because the entities behind this didn't know themselves, or because they'd deliberately withheld it, or because Marcus's brain couldn't process that level of complexity. But he understood the basic principle. The month-long observation period was concluding. Whatever data collection protocol had been running was nearing completion, and he sat at the center of it. Marcus considered running, leaving New Mexico entirely, getting as far from the station as possible before December 14th arrived. But he knew somehow that running wouldn't help. The selection had already occurred. The data transfer had already begun. His neural patterns were now entangled with the signal in ways that transcended physical distance. Wherever he went, he'd still be connected, still monitored, still being prepared for whatever came next. So he stayed, kept documenting, kept letting his unconscious hand fill notebooks with diagrams and equations and star charts showing skies he'd never seen, and waited for the convergence. Chapter 12. The Hidden Network. Marcus began searching for others. If the grid covered thousands of square miles, And if the observation protocol had been running for years, there had to be other monitoring stations, other technicians who'd noticed anomalies, other people who'd transmitted and drawn attention. He couldn't use official channels. His clearances had likely been revoked after the government confiscation. But the internet connected communities interested in unexplained phenomena. Forums, message boards, social media groups dedicated to UFO sightings and electromagnetic anomalies. Marcus created anonymous accounts and started searching. Most of what he found was noise, conspiracy theories, misidentified aircraft, Venus rising, people desperate to find meaning in random events. But occasionally, buried in the noise, he found signal. A post from October describing harmonic radio interference near Tucson. Repeating 11-minute cycles, no identified source. A YouTube video from September showing spectrum analysis of mysterious transmissions recorded in southern Colorado. The waveform patterns looked familiar. A Reddit thread from August discussing geometric light patterns seen near Socorro, triangular formations, silent movement, descriptions matching exactly what Marcus had witnessed. He cross-referenced locations on his map. The reports came from points aligned with the grid structure. People all across the Southwest had been experiencing fragments of what Marcus was seeing. Isolated incidents, they couldn't connect into a larger pattern. But one account stood out. A detailed blog post from July written by a radio astronomer named Dr. Sarah Chen, who operated a private research station in the Arizona desert. She described detecting an unexplained signal that demonstrated intelligent response to mathematical transmissions she'd sent. Her description of the signal characteristics matched Marcus's data perfectly. Same frequency range, same harmonic structure, same adaptive behavior, but her blog had stopped updating in early August. The final post mentioned a visit from Defense Department representatives requesting her data for security review. Then silence. Marcus found Dr. Chen's contact information through academic directories and sent a carefully worded email using encrypted channels. He didn't expect a response. If she'd been visited by the same people who'd confiscated his equipment, she'd likely been warned against further investigation. But 3 hours later, his phone rang from an unknown number. "Mr. Webb?" A woman's voice, cautious. "I received your message. We need to talk, but not electronically. Can you meet in person?" They arranged a meeting at a rest stop on Interstate 25, halfway between their locations, neutral territory, public enough to discourage interference, isolated enough for private conversation. Dr. Chen arrived in a dust-covered sedan, looking exactly like her academic profile photo. Mid-40s, wire-rimmed glasses, intense eyes that suggested long nights studying data. She got straight to business. "Show me your signal recordings." Marcus pulled out his laptop and displayed what little data he'd managed to preserve. The spectrum images, audio samples, the geometric waveform patterns. Dr. Chen studied them for several minutes, then nodded slowly. "It's the same signal, exactly the same characteristics I recorded in July, but yours shows much more complexity. It's evolved." "You transmitted to it?" "Just once. Prime numbers like you. It responded by continuing the sequence. I was preparing a more complex message when they arrived." She looked away, jaw tight with frustration. 2 men, 2 women, confiscated everything. Told me it was classified satellite testing and to stop all monitoring immediately. I complied because I didn't want federal charges, but I kept thinking about that signal. "Have you experienced anything else? Missing time? Compulsive drawing? Dr. Chen's eyes widened slightly. You've had episodes. Marcus showed her his notebooks. The star charts, equations, biological diagrams. After a close encounter with one of the objects, I have 6 hours I can't account for, and knowledge I shouldn't possess. She examined the drawings carefully. These star patterns, I've seen similar formations, not in my conscious memories, but in dreams. Vivid dreams that feel more like recovered memories than imagination. She pulled out her own notebook, flipped to a page covered in astronomical notation. I've been mapping them, trying to identify any of the constellations against known stellar positions. Did you find matches? No, none of them correspond to any view of our sky from Earth, but they're consistent with each other. They're all views of the same stellar neighbourhood from different angles, like... She paused, working through the implication. Like triangulation data, multiple observations of the same space from different locations. Marcus understood immediately. They're showing us where they're from, not through language or coordinates, but through geometric stellar relationships. If that's true, I can calculate approximate distance and direction. Dr. Chen's hands moved rapidly across her notebook, performing spherical geometry calculations. Based on the angular separations and perspective shifts, roughly 700 light years. Direction? She stopped, staring at her results. What? Cygnus constellation. There's a star system in Cygnus, 712 light years away, that's been flagged by SETI programs as showing possible technosignatures, unusual spectral patterns suggesting massive stellar engineering. It's been dismissed as natural phenomena, but maybe it's not natural. They sat in silence, processing the implications. If the stellar maps were accurate, if the calculations were correct, then the objects hidden in the grid weren't from Earth. They weren't even from the solar system. They were from a civilization capable of crossing 700 light years of space and establishing invisible monitoring networks in Earth's atmosphere. Dr. Chen closed her notebook. Mr. Webb, I need you to understand something. I stopped investigating because I was afraid, but I've regretted that decision every day since. If you're planning to continue monitoring, to keep documenting what's happening, I want to help. I have resources, equipment, expertise you might need. The convergence happens in 11 days, all grid points contracting on my station. I don't know what that means, but I need to understand it before it completes. Then we have 11 days to figure out what we're dealing with and what they want from us. They spent the next hour comparing data, sharing observations, building a comprehensive picture of the phenomenon. The grid existed globally, not just in the southwest. Dr. Chen had found evidence of similar electromagnetic patterns recorded by research stations in Antarctica, Siberia, the Australian outback. Remote locations away from population centres where unusual signals might go unnoticed. The convergence Marcus was experiencing wasn't unique either. Dr. Chen had documented a similar contraction event in July, grid points moving closer together, before an atmospheric disturbance erased all signal activity for 48 hours. What happened after the disturbance cleared? The grid reset, returned to original spacing, but with slight modifications. The frequency characteristics changed. The harmonic patterns evolved slightly. She searched for the right analogy, like a software update. Marcus understood. They're iterating, improving the system based on observational data. The convergence events are collection periods where concentrated monitoring occurs, followed by analysis and system refinement, which means your convergence in 11 days will result in concentrated observation, possibly of you specifically, since you're at the central coordinate. Observation for what purpose? Doctor. Chen met his eyes. I think we're the study, Mr. Webb. Not individuals, not governments or nations. All of us. Humanity, our civilization, our technology, our biology. We're being catalogued. By what? By whom? By something that's been watching us for a very long time. Something that plants monitoring grids on worlds and records their development across decades or centuries. Something that treats entire species as data points in a research protocol we can't begin to comprehend. Marcus thought about the message written in his notebook. Subject viable for linguistic interface development. They weren't studying humanity from a distance anymore. They were preparing for direct contact. Chapter 13. The Realization. Marcus and Dr. Chen established a working routine. She relocated temporarily to Socorro, setting up equipment in a motel room where they could analyze data without attracting attention. Marcus continued monitoring from the station at night, documenting signal changes as the convergence approached. The pattern became clearer with each passing day. The grid wasn't transmitting outward. That had been Marcus's initial assumption, some kind of communication system broadcasting to distant receivers. But detailed analysis of the signal propagation showed something different. The frequencies were being used as active scanning pulses, like sonar, like radar. But instead of acoustic waves or radio reflections, the grid was using electromagnetic resonance to map Earth's surface, atmosphere, and near-space environment in continuous real time. Every living thing created a unique electromagnetic signature through biological processes, neural activity, cardiac rhythms, cellular metabolism. The grid was sophisticated enough to detect and map those signatures, to track not just populations, but individuals, to monitor changes in biological patterns across entire regions. It's not a communication system, Dr. Chen said, staring at the analysis results. It's a sensor array, a planetary-scale imaging system operating at resolutions fine enough to track individual organisms. Marcus pulled up historical signal data Dr. Chen had preserved before her equipment was confiscated. If that's true, we should see correlation between signal intensity and population density. More biological targets should produce stronger returns. They mapped signal strength against population data. The correlation was perfect. Urban areas showed subtle but measurable increases in background signal activity. Rural areas were quieter. Uninhabited regions almost silent except for the baseline grid structure. The system was scanning Earth's biosphere continuously. Had been scanning for years, possibly decades, building a comprehensive database of every living thing on the planet. But why? Marcus leaned back in his chair, frustrated. What's the purpose? Scientific research? Military reconnaissance? Resource assessment? Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled up one of the astronomical images from Marcus's notebook, a star chart showing unfamiliar constellations. What if it's none of those things? What if the purpose is something we can't relate to because we've never done it ourselves? Meaning what? Think about how we study endangered species. We tag them, track their movements, monitor population changes, document behavior patterns. We do this not because we want to exploit them, but because we want to understand them, to preserve them, to maintain records of what they were in case they disappear. Marcus felt a chill despite the warm motel room. You're saying they're cataloguing us like an endangered species? I'm saying they're cataloguing us like a developing species, one that might not survive its own technological adolescence. Think about it. Climate change, nuclear weapons, ecological collapse, artificial intelligence. Humanity is at a critical transition point. We're either going to achieve stable interstellar civilization or destroy ourselves within the next few centuries. There's no middle ground. And they're watching to see which outcome occurs. More than watching, recording, preserving. If a civilization capable of crossing 700 light years wanted to maintain a universal archive of intelligent species, they'd need to document those species before they disappeared. While they still existed in their original form, Marcus understood the implication. We're not being monitored because we're important. We're being monitored because we're temporary. Every species that develops technology reaches this point. Most don't survive it. The ones that do become something different, post-biological, perhaps, merged with artificial intelligence, uploaded into computational substrates, transformed beyond recognition. The grid isn't studying humanity, as we are now, because we're currently interesting. It's studying us because this version of humanity won't exist much longer. One way or another, we're going to change, or vanish. The thought was both humbling and terrifying. They weren't the center of anyone's attention. They were specimens, data entries in an archive spanning light years and millennia, cataloguing the brief flowering of biological intelligence on countless worlds before that intelligence either transcended or extinguished itself. How many others are there? Marcus asked quietly. How many grids on how many worlds? Doctor. Chen shook her head. No way to know. But if they're from Cygnus, that's a region with hundreds of stars. If they've achieved interstellar capability, they could have monitoring networks on every potentially habitable world within 700 light years. Thousands of planets, millions of species, all being scanned, documented, preserved in whatever databases they maintain. Marcus thought about the convergence approaching his station. Why contact us now? If they've been watching passively for decades, why reveal themselves? Because you transmitted. You made yourself noticeable. You demonstrated understanding of mathematical communication and curiosity about the signal. From their perspective, you might be representative of humanity's current developmental state, an opportunity to establish linguistic interface, their term from your notebook, with a typical specimen. I'm not typical. Exactly. Which means their assessment might be flawed. They might think all humans have your level of technical knowledge and curiosity, or they might understand you're an outlier, but consider you useful, anyway, as a communication bridge. The implications crystallized in Marcus's mind. The convergence isn't about me. It's about using me as a template. They're going to attempt direct information exchange using my neural patterns as a model. If it works, they can expand it to other humans. If it fails, he didn't finish the sentence. Dr. Chen completed the thought. If it fails, they'll note it in their archive and continue passive observation until humanity either develops more compatible neurology or ceases to exist. They sat in silence as the evening darkened outside the motel window. The convergence was 8 days away. 8 days until Marcus became a test subject for first contact protocols developed by something that viewed entire civilizations as temporary phenomena worth recording before they disappeared. Chapter 14. The Return Broadcast. The signal changed on December 10th. Marcus was monitoring from the station when every spectrum analyzer simultaneously spiked to maximum, overwhelming the receivers with signal strength far beyond anything previously recorded. The displays went white, then red, then began cycling through colours that shouldn't exist in the electromagnetic spectrum. Shades his eyes could see, but his brain couldn't process. Then the signal stopped. Complete silence across all frequencies, not static, not background noise. Absolute electromagnetic void, as if someone had turned off physics itself. The silence lasted 14 seconds. When the signal resumed, it was different. Not harmonic tones anymore, not geometric patterns. Something new. Marcus grabbed his phone and called Dr. Chen. "Are you seeing this?" Signal just transformed completely. Running it through analysis now. Pause. "Marcus, this is phonetic structure. Actual linguistic content embedded in the carrier wave. It's trying to form words." Marcus watched the waveform display reorganize into patterns that resembled speech spectrograms. The signal was modulating in ways consistent with human language production. Formants, phonemes, prosodic variation. But not any human language. The sounds that emerged from his speakers were alien, yet somehow familiar. Like hearing someone speak a language he'd never studied, but could almost understand through pure intuition. "Doctor." Chen's voice came through the phone, excited. "I'm running it through translation algorithms. The syntax structure resembles Proto-Indo-European root patterns, but with additions, extra grammatical cases, tense markers indicating probability rather than certainty. It's like language designed for discussing events that might or might not occur, for describing multiple parallel possibilities simultaneously." The signal continued for 11 minutes, the same duration as the original harmonic cycles, but now filled with alien speech that Marcus's ears heard as pure sound, while something deeper in his brain struggled to extract meaning. Then it resolved. One phrase repeated 3 times in increasingly clear articulation. Observation cycle nearing completion. The translation wasn't verbal. Marcus didn't hear those words through his ears. They appeared directly in his understanding, as if the concept had been placed into his mind fully formed. "Doctor." Chen whispered through the phone. "Did you understand that?" "Yes." "How?" "There's no Rosetta Stone for this. No shared reference points. How can you possibly?" "The neural interface. Whatever they did to me during the missing time. They didn't just record information. They modified my neurology. Created pathways for direct conceptual transfer." Marcus felt simultaneously violated and fascinated. "I'm understanding this the same way I understand my own thoughts. Not through translation, but through direct meaning injection." The signal shifted again. New phrase, new concept implanted directly. Linguistic bridge established. Data transmission commencing. Then Marcus's world exploded with information. Not visual, not verbal, pure conceptual download flowing through his consciousness, faster than thought. He experienced rather than learned the purpose of the grid, planetary monitoring network, one of thousands scattered across habitable worlds within a 700 light-year radius, operating for 16,000 Earth years, documenting the rise and fall of technological civilizations. The observers themselves, post-biological intelligence distributed across quantum-entangled substrates spanning multiple star systems. No central authority, no individual identity, just coordinated awareness examining the universe for patterns in how intelligence emerged, evolved, and either transcended or failed. Their conclusion regarding humanity: high probability of technological self-termination within 3 to 5 centuries. Minimal probability of achieving post-biological transition. Recommended for intensive documentation during remaining viable period. The convergence purpose: concentration of sensor apparatus to enable high-resolution recording of representative individual neural patterns before civilization level changes, makes such recording impossible. Their intended timeline: complete, comprehensive biological and cultural documentation by 2087. Archive and withdraw monitoring network. Allow humanity to develop or collapse without further observation. And finally, the reason for contact. Marcus's transmissions had demonstrated pattern recognition capability and mathematical reasoning, suggesting early-stage development of conceptual frameworks that might support post-biological transition. His neural architecture showed unusual plasticity, making him viable for experimental communication protocols that might be applicable to broader population if species' survival trajectory improved. The information flow stopped. Marcus found himself on the floor of the monitoring room with no memory of falling. Doctor. Chen's voice came from his phone, distant and concerned. Marcus? Marcus, are you there? He picked up the phone with shaking hands. I'm here. What happened? You went silent for 40 seconds. I received everything. They just transmitted their entire assessment of humanity directly into my head. I know what they are, what they want, why we're being monitored. And, Marcus laughed, a sound edging toward hysteria. We're a data entry, that's it. Just another species that developed technology and will probably destroy itself before figuring out how to survive. They're documenting us for their archive, so when we're gone, something will remember we existed. Marcus, they've watched hundreds of civilizations. Sarah, maybe thousands. We're not special. We're not even interesting. We're just temporary biological intelligence, following the same predictable path everyone follows. Either we'll achieve post-biological transition, whatever that means, or we'll exterminate ourselves through war or environmental collapse. They're betting on extinction. 73% probability, calculated from observing similar species at similar developmental stages. What's the 27%? Species that survived all transition to non-biological existence within 600 years of developing artificial intelligence, uploaded themselves, merged with machines, became something that doesn't need planets or bodies or biological reproduction. The observers themselves went through it 16,000 years ago. Now they just watch to see which new species make the transition and which don't. Doctor. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Did they tell you why they're revealing all this? Why break passive observation protocol? Because I asked. The transmissions I sent demonstrated curiosity about the signal. They interpreted that as potential for developing the kind of consciousness that might survive technological adolescence. So they're testing whether direct conceptual transfer works with human neurology. If it does, they might share their findings with humanity as a whole. Give us a heads up about the extinction timeline. Maybe improve our survival odds from 27 to 30 or 40%. And if the transfer doesn't work, then they note it in their archive and go back to passive monitoring until we either figure things out ourselves or disappear. Either way, their data is preserved. The signal had gone silent again. The spectrum analyzers showed only background noise, normal electromagnetic environment returning. But Marcus knew the quiet wouldn't last. The convergence was 4 days away, and whatever happened on December 14th would determine whether humanity got a warning about its probable extinction or just became another archived species remembered only in alien databases spanning 700 light-years of space. Chapter 15. The Vanishing. December 14th arrived with clear skies and unusual warmth for midwinter New Mexico. Marcus spent the day preparing. He'd set up additional recording equipment borrowed from Dr. Chen's private research facility. Cameras pointing at the sky, audio recorders, spectrum analyzers with backup power. everything he could think of to document whatever occurred during the convergence. Dr. Chen wanted to be present, but Marcus insisted she maintain distance. If something went wrong, if the contact attempt proved harmful, at least one person needed to survive with knowledge of what had happened. She set up observation equipment 30 miles away and maintained constant communication via encrypted satellite link. Signal strength is increasing, she reported at 8 p.m. All grid frequencies intensifying simultaneously. It's beginning. Marcus stepped outside the station. The night was absolutely still. No wind, no sound. Even the usual insect chorus had ceased, leaving vacuum quiet that felt like the world holding its breath. Overhead, the stars began to shift. Not moving, not twinkling, shifting. Their positions sliding incrementally as the massive distortion field expanded to cover the entire visible sky. Within minutes, Marcus was looking up through a window into displaced space, seeing constellations he didn't recognize from a vantage point not on Earth. Then the objects revealed themselves. Not just one. Dozens. Triangular forms hanging motionless at varying altitudes from 1,000 to 10,000 feet, arranged in perfect geometric formation around the station. Each one measured several hundred feet across, surfaces pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that created ripples of light across impossible geometries. They'd been there all along, hidden by electromagnetic camouflage, maintaining position in three-dimensional lattice structure. Now, for the first time since establishing the monitoring grid, they were allowing themselves to be seen. Marcus activated all his cameras, knowing the images would look fake, would be dismissed as computer graphics or hoax, but needing to record anyway. The pulsing patterns synchronized across all visible objects. The signal intensity built to levels that made his ears pop and his teeth ache. Electromagnetic pressure physically affecting his body. Then simultaneously, every object released a smaller probe. Dozens of car-sized spheres descended smoothly, silently, each trailing pale blue light. They moved with perfect coordination, approaching ground level, in formation that maintained precise spacing. One sphere descended directly toward Marcus. It stopped 10 feet above him, hovering effortlessly, its surface reflecting his upturned face in strange curved distortions. The blue light emerged, washing over him. Marcus expected fear, expected pain, expected something dramatic and traumatic. Instead, he felt welcomed. The scanning sensation was familiar from his previous encounter, but gentler now, less invasive, like being recognized by something that had studied him extensively and now greeted him as a known entity. Information began flowing again. Not overwhelming this time, but measured, controlled, almost conversational in its pacing. They showed him the archive, not physically, conceptually. A database spanning millions of years and thousands of light years, containing comprehensive documentation of 743 technological civilizations discovered within their observation range. Complete biological records, cultural artifacts, technological progression timelines, final outcomes, extinction or transcendence. They showed him humanity's entry, detailed files containing atmospheric composition samples from the Pleistocene, genetic analyses from Homo erectus, archaeological documentation of first tool use, linguistic records of every dead and living language, mathematical models predicting human population curves, technological development rates, resource consumption patterns, and the projected timeline, peak population around 2080, probable environmental collapse beginning 2013, technological civilization extinct by 2025. Species survival, questionable but possible in reduced capacity, unless intervention occurred. Marcus felt the question forming in his mind, not his own thought, but something placed there. Do you want us to share this information with your species? He understood the implications. If humanity learned it was being monitored by something vastly more advanced, learned its probable extinction timeline, learned that survival required fundamental transformation beyond biological existence, how would it respond? Some would deny, some would despair, some might accelerate their own destruction through panic, but some, maybe enough, might use the information to change course, to take the extinction projection seriously and work actively toward the 27% outcome instead of accepting the 73% probability. Marcus felt his answer forming. Not words, pure intention transmitted through the neural interface. Yes, we deserve to know, the response came instantly. Linguistic interface successful. Data transmission protocols viable for broader implementation. Beginning withdrawal. The blue light faded. The sphere rose smoothly back toward the massive triangular object above. All around the station, the other spheres were ascending simultaneously, reintegrating with their parent structures. The pulsing light patterns shifted to new configurations. The objects began to fade, their camouflage reasserting. Within 5 minutes, they were gone completely. The distortion field collapsed. The stars returned to their proper positions. Marcus stood alone in the desert night, feeling the absence of the vast presence that had occupied the sky moments before. His phone chimed. Doctor, Chen's voice shaking. Marcus, what just happened? The signal just vanished globally. Every monitoring station reporting complete cessation. It's like someone turned off a switch. They're leaving. Observation cycle complete. They got what they needed. Which was what? Proof that human neurology can support direct conceptual transfer, that we're capable of receiving information in formats that bypass language and cultural translation, that we might be able to understand what we need to do to survive. Marcus looked up at the normal night sky, knowing those objects were still there, but now truly invisible, beginning their withdrawal from Earth's atmosphere after decades of silent monitoring. They're going to transmit everything to humanity, the full archive, our biological documentation, our extinction timeline, all of it, through the same neural interface they established with me, broadcast on frequencies that will reach every human brain simultaneously, like a planetary software update. When? Soon. They didn't specify, but they want us to have time to process it, to understand it, to decide what we do with the information. The signal remained silent for the first time in exactly 1 month. Epilogue. The silence after contact. 3 months passed, the signal never returned. Global monitoring networks documented the absence, electromagnetic void where structured patterns had existed. The grid had vanished as completely as it had appeared, leaving no trace except in the memories and data of the few people who'd noticed it. Official explanations emerged within weeks. Government statements attributed the November-December anomalies to classified satellite testing. The electromagnetic disturbances were dismissed as solar activity. The sighting reports were explained as natural atmospheric phenomena, misidentified aircraft, mass hallucination. Marcus's video evidence was analysed by experts, who declared it sophisticated computer-generated imagery. Dr. Chen's signal recordings were dismissed as equipment malfunction. Every documented incident was systematically explained away or forgotten. Life returned to normal. The 24-hour news cycle moved on. Social media found new mysteries to obsess over. The government sealed the relevant files under classification that wouldn't expire for 75 years. Marcus returned to his monitoring duties at the station. New equipment had been installed, better receivers, more sensitive spectrum analyzers. Everything functioned perfectly, logging the routine electromagnetic environment of an empty New Mexico plateau. He never saw the visitors again, but he felt them sometimes, during electrical storms, when atmospheric electricity made his equipment flicker to life, with ghost signals that lasted seconds before fading. Brief moments when he could swear the spectrum analyzers showed familiar geometric patterns, glimpses of triangular distortions in storm clouds before lightning illuminated their absence. And he waited for the transmission they'd promised, the planetary broadcast, the archive download, the moment when 7 billion human minds would suddenly understand they were being monitored, catalogued, preserved before their probable extinction. He didn't know when it would happen, didn't know if it would feel like revelation or madness, didn't know if humanity would accept the information or reject it as mass delusion. But he knew it was coming, because on quiet nights, when he stood outside the station looking up at stars that were definitely just stars, he could feel the knowledge growing in his mind, like a seed planted months ago, finally beginning to sprout. Mathematics he'd never studied became comprehensible. Concepts about quantum entanglement and faster-than-light information transfer resolved into clear understanding. The biological diagrams in his notebook started making sense. Not human anatomy, but the next stage beyond human anatomy. What bodies might look like when biological and technological systems merged completely. He was changing, gradually, incrementally. The neural modifications they'd made continuing to develop, preparing him for whatever information they'd eventually transmit. Dr. Chen experienced similar changes. She reported dreams in mathematical notation, waking insights into physics that shouldn't be possible without decades more research. Ideas for technologies that might help humanity survive its technological adolescence, if anyone would listen. They'd become something between what humans were and what humans might become. Not post-biological, not yet, but moved along that developmental path, given a preview of where evolution might lead if the species survived. And sometimes, during those electrical storms, Marcus would go outside and let the rain fall on his face and wonder if somewhere 700 light years away in the Cygnus constellation, vast distributed intelligences were reviewing the data collected from Earth's monitoring grid, documenting humanity in comprehensive detail before civilization-level changes made such documentation impossible, preparing their archive entry for the species that called itself human, waiting to see if this particular iteration of biological intelligence would join the 27% who transcended or the 73% who disappeared, watching from a distance only they could span, patient and curious as the data points plotted across decades continued their trajectory toward one outcome or another. We spend our lives searching the sky for signals, Marcus thought, standing in the rain while ghost frequencies flickered through his equipment, never considering the possibility that the signal arrived long ago, that it's been studying us for generations, recording everything we are, everything we've been, everything we might become, preserving our story in archives spanning light years and millennia, so that even if we fail, even if we join the majority who couldn't survive their own technological adolescence, something, somewhere, will remember that we existed, that we tried, that for a brief moment in cosmic history, biological intelligence looked up at the stars from a small planet in an unremarkable spiral arm and wondered if anyone was looking back. Now we know the answer. They were. They are. And they're watching still, invisible and patient, as we decide whether we'll survive long enough to watch back. The signal is silent now, but the observation continues. And one day, perhaps soon, humanity will receive the transmission that changes everything. The archive entry for our species delivered directly into our collective consciousness. 7 billion minds simultaneously understanding our place in the vast catalogue of intelligent life. Our probable future, our slim chances for survival, and the choice we face, adapt or perish, transcend or fade, become something new or join the archived majority who remain only as data in someone else's memory. The stars offered no answers that night, but Marcus stood in the storm anyway, waiting, listening, ready for the day the silence ends and the true conversation begins.